Hello everyone. So thank you for this the great conference. So let's start our session. Our session title is Korea, China, Japan Nexus Generation Seminar. As the title shows, this session is the round table of the young generation. So the guys want to listen the voice of the young generation about the changing international and the regional security environment, and then some currently so troubling the world. So KAIST invited 6 graduate students with the support of the Korea Foundation. So we have the 2 Korean students, also 2 Chinese students, and then 2 Japanese students. But all of them is now studying in Korea. So let me introduce the 6 people. So the Lee Soo-yeon from Seoul National University. And second is the Lee Hae-min, Ewha Women's University. And third is the Choi Sul-ling from the Sungkyunkwan University. And then Lee Bin from Yonsei University. And Imada Kyota, Seoul National University. And Ohara Ayaka from Seoul National University. Okay. So I think we have the 2 themes which we will discuss in this session. So since we invited the students from the 3 Northeast Asian countries, definitely the core theme of this session maybe will be trilateral relations or trilateral cooperation. But also KAIST add one more issue to this session. So Korea's participation on the G7 platform. This is one of the diplomatic concern which many Korean people pay attention. So the KAIST also want to get opinion about this issue from the session. So I asked all of them to prepare the presentation material. So 3 or 4 the participants prepare the presentation for focusing on trilateral cooperation, and then other guys covering the issue of the Korea's participation on G7 platform. So let's handle all issues in this session. So I suggest that we will have the 2-round presentation. At the first round, all participants present their own paper. And then second round, all the participants comment and then ask questions to other people. So we have only the 100 minute, but we have the 6 presenter. So at the first round, each person will finish their presentations around 8 minutes and most the 10 minutes. So, and then in second round, each person will have the 5 minutes. I don't know. So I want to have the third round or the time for answering the questions. But I don't know. Let's see. So if we have there is the remaining time, we have the third round. But if not, we will discuss in after session maybe, or keep in mind for your studying. So I want we will start from the issue of the trilateral cooperation and then move to the issue of the Korea's participation on G7 in the first round. So let's say here is the decision on the presentation order. At first, the Lee Hae-min from the Ewha University, and second is the Choi Sul-ling from the Sungkyunkwan University, and the third is the Lee Bin from the Yonsei University, and then fourth is the Ohara-sang from Seoul National University. Fifth is the Imada Kyota from the SNU, and finally Lee Soo-yeon from the Seoul National University will present. So let me give the mic to the Lee Hae-min. Please.
Yes. Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Hae-min Lee from Ewha Women's University. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participating as a discussant. Let me introduce myself briefly. I have been working here at KAIST, the Korean Association International Studies, since last 2022. I've prepared for more than 10 conferences, but this is my first time participating as a panelist. I majored in Southeast Asian political economy, so I'm not familiar with today's topic. Because of that, I'm afraid that my opinions remain theoretical rather than pragmatic. I will begin the presentation. I try to think about how to improve the trilateral cooperation, focusing on variables that affect their cooperation. I'd like to think about this in two sections. First, we can trace the history of trilateral cooperation, which will allow us to see what factors have affected the cooperation. There are several factors, such as historical issues, political mistrust, and shared economic interest from overview. Some of them remain unresolved. And second part, in the current circumstance, the US-China rivalry and economic security are seen as factors affecting trilateral cooperation. The first section describes the relationship and cooperation between the three countries, so I will explain this part briefly. The trilateral cooperation among the three countries has changed unevenly, shaped by political tensions, historical issues, and shared economic interest. While bilateral ties among the three have fluctuated, trilateral cooperation as a structural diplomatic effort only began to emerge in the late 1990s and became more institutionalized in the 2000s. First, during the Cold War, trilateral cooperation was non-existent. Separate bilateral relations, Japan and China and Japan and South Korea evolved independently, and trade between Japan and China expanded after normalization in 1972. But political relations remained cautious. In other words, there was no structured trilateral cooperation that existed during this period. Factors that had affected in this period can be broadly divided into three categories. First, ideological divisions. As it was the Cold War, ideological divisions seemed the most critical. And second is a lack of diplomatic recognition. And third is historical issues. Next, since the Cold War, there was normalization between South Korea and China in 1992. And the Asian financial crisis in 1997 highlighted the need for regional economic cooperation, which led to dialogue among the three countries in 1999. The first trilateral meeting primarily focused on finance and economic policy. The third part is the institutionalization period since the 2000s. The first trilateral summit was held in Japan in 2008, and in 2011, the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, as known as TCS, was established, which was set up to promote and coordinate trilateral projects, and it institutionalized cooperation through working groups, academic exchanges, and policy dialogues. But there were obstacles to this movement. It was due to, first, historical disputes, and second is territorial tensions, and third is security friction, such as the THAAD deployment in South Korea in 2016. And this led to that. First, the trilateral summits were delayed or suspended for several years. The second, talks on the CJKFTA stalled. And lastly, political mistrust limited strategic dialogue. The history of trilateral cooperation has gradually changed. While economic interdependence and shared regional interests have fostered dialogue, historical issues and strategical rivalries continue to complicate the deeper political alignment. Nevertheless, the institutional mechanism established in the 2000s, particularly the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, TCS, provide the foundation for crucial in a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. Now that we've completed these four parts, let's move on to the second section and look at the factors that affected the present. Amid the rising US-China rivalry, global economic uncertainty, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the three countries have shown renewed interest in cooperation. They focus on supply chain resilience, and the trilateral summit resumed after a hiatus. TCS to facilitating working level and people-to-people exchanges are ongoing. I will be the next. The new pace East Asia faces after the Trump administration. Why do we discuss economic security in the Trump era? As seen in the strategy of major countries to strengthen economic security, such as diversifying supply chains, protecting core technologies, and strengthening industrial policies, the expansion of the concept of economic security goes beyond the academic discussion and leads to realistic challenges that countries face in practical areas. In this case, can economic security and cooperation be parsed together? And can two seemingly contradictory concepts be reconciled? Security is about protecting me and us from what I perceived as a threat, while cooperation is not. From liberalism perspective, economic security can be understood in terms of multilateral cooperation and market openness, and trade and economic cooperation play an important role in alleviating conflicts between countries. Given the circumstances of the US-China rivalry, the three countries could find a detour to improve cooperation as follows. I would like to provide two options. First, cooperation in economic and trade field, specifically institutional cooperation independent of real politics, can be a detour to competition. The significant thing is in an institutionalized cooperation. And the second is bottom-up strategy, as seen in the continued operation of TCS to facilitate working level and people-to-people exchange, can be another detour as well. I think cooperation cannot occur until everything is resolved. We need to find ways to cooperate for a future that is better than the present. Nothing will get better if we just focus on resolve the problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe having finally the mention about the institutional cooperation among the three countries, and then I think the Sulling's the presentation also covered this the institutional point, maybe focusing on the trilateral FTA the measurement. So let's move to the Sulling's the presentation. Go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, I'm Suling Cui from Sungkyunkwan University. I'm glad to be here today for the KF session of CJK Cooperation at the Korean Association of International Studies. Today, I'd like to discuss changes in the regional order and the possibility of trilateral cooperation. Since the first summit in 1999, China, South Korea, and Japan have been engaged in trilateral cooperation for more than 2 decades, with a total of 9 summit meetings held so far. However, despite this continuity, real progress has been limited. Much of the cooperation has remained largely symbolic, with few substantial policy outcomes. The 9th summit, held in 2023 after a period of more than 4 years, was diplomatically significant, but it did not result in any meaningful achievements. And the CJK FTA has been stalled since 2019. Moreover, the trilateral process has proven highly vulnerable to bilateral tensions. Scholars generally point to 3 main reasons why deeper cooperation among the 3 countries has been so hard to achieve. The first factor is the structure of the US-led regional order. Since the 1950s, South Korea and Japan have been firmly tied to the US through a hub-and-spoke alliance system, which limits their ability to engage in regional initiatives that exclude Washington. As the US acts as an offshore balancer in East Asia, this structure complicates closer ties with China. On the other hand, China's rise had led to regional tensions, such as the SAR dispute with South Korea and territorial dispute with Japan. In response, both Seoul and Tokyo have strengthened their strategic ties with US, as seen in GSOMIA and Camp David Summit in 2023. While South Korea follows a dual-track strategy, maintaining US security tie while trading with China, and China and Japan continue to experience cold politics and hot economics. As a result, trilateral cooperation remains fragile and often stalls when bilateral conflicts emerge. The second factor is the role of historical memory and nationalism. Although there hasn't been direct military conflict in East Asia since the Cold War, relations among CJK remain strained largely due to unresolved historical issues, such as memories of Japanese colonial rule and wartime actions. These tensions are often amplified by the nationalism, which shapes public opinion and limits diplomatic flexibility. SAR deployment, the comfort women issue, and territorial disputes over the Diaoyu Island have triggered strong public reactions, including protests and boycotts. The third factor is that the three countries have had different regional strategies. South Korea's top priority are dealing with North Korea's nuclear threat and preparing for reunification. For this reason, South Korea tends to shape its foreign policy mainly around stability on the peninsula. In contrast, China and Japan have been competing for influence in the wider region. Japan has sought to balance China's growing influence in the region, for example, by opposing China's entry into CPTPP and by limiting its role within RCEP. And China has promoted its own regional vision through initiatives like Belt and Road and AIIB. These differences show that each of the three countries had its own regional vision and strategic priorities, and for none of them has trilateral cooperation been a top priority. Among these three factors, I think the most important has been the structural constraint posed by the US-led regional order. Because other factors, such as historical memory and identity politics, are not new. In fact, South Korea and Japan and China and Japan established diplomatic relations even before the memory of World War II had fully faded. This suggests that historical issues cannot fully explain the long-term stagnation of trilateral cooperation. It is the structure of the regional order that has made cooperation difficult. But in the Trump era, that very order began to shift. During the Trump administration, the United States adopted a more isolationist stance, emphasizing America First policies. It identified China as a near-peer competitor and began to assess alliance through a cost-benefit lens. The administration demanded greater defense burden sharing from allies, imposed tariffs on key imports, and urged companies to relocate production back to the US. As a result, even traditional US allies began to feel uncertainty in their partnerships and seek greater strategic autonomy. Long-term uncertainty became a defining feature of the regional environment. In this context, China reassessed the strategic value of its neighboring countries. In March 2024, Xi Jinping met with executives from Samsung and SK Hynix, signaling that China continues to position itself as a stable and attractive destination for foreign investment. In April this year, China held a central conference on work related to neighboring countries for the second time in 12 years. At the meeting, Xi emphasized that fostering stable relations with the neighboring states is now a top foreign policy priority. Historically, China's peripheral diplomacy has viewed as a secondary to its relation with major powers like USA and Russia. Relations with neighbors were often managed mainly to maintain a stable environment for economic development. But with the US-China strategic rivalry intensifying, China has started to view its neighboring countries as more important strategically. In sum, the US-led regional order, which used to provide stability in East Asia, is now starting to weaken. In this changing environment, China is trying to build stronger strategic ties with neighboring countries. This suggests that the structural barrier that once made trilateral cooperation difficult is now beginning to change. During the Trump administration, as I said before, the United States imposed tariffs and demanded greater defense cost sharing from allies. These policies exposed the vulnerability to export-dependent economies like Japan and South Korea. Japan faced the risk of high tariffs on key industries, while South Korean exports to the US declined significantly. As a result, China, Japan, and South Korea have all experienced growing uncertainty and have begun to reassess their strategic and economic priorities. Japan has sought to diversify trade partners, including closer economic ties with China. And China has taken steps to resume seafood imports from Japan and has signaled friendliness towards South Korea and Japan by implementing visa-free policies and expressing interest in restarting CJK FTA negotiation. Actually, trilateral cooperation among CJK did not begin as an ideational or normative project. Rather, it emerged out of pragmatic recognition of the need for regional mechanisms in the aftermath of Asian financial crisis. In other words, it was driven by the realist imperative to pursue common interest rather than by ideological or normative goals. Under the Trump era, growing uncertainty in East Asia's security and economic order is prompting China, Japan, and South Korea to once again recognize their mutual need for cooperation. Based on this shared recognition, there is a reason to expect that trilateral cooperation will make meaningful progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Suling to emphasize the China's changing attitude to neighboring country. Maybe that will be some stepping stone for the future development of the trilateral cooperation. And then also mention several the institutional mechanism, mainly about the trilateral FTA. And so next is the Libin also mentioned this institutional point, but the BN is much more focusing on the perception dimension. So maybe interesting point. So let's move on. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, Professor Lee. My name is Li Bin, and I am a PhD student in the Department of Political Science at Yonsei University. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to speak at this session. My research interests primarily focus on South Korea's domestic politics and China's perception towards South Korea. According to my research, the China-South Korea relationship has been shaped primarily by two key factors. First, the state of China-US relations, and second, the evolution of South Korea's domestic political landscape. In contrast, China's internal political structure has remained relatively stable, mainly due to its authoritarian regime and infrequent leadership transitions. The recent leadership changes in the United States, South Korea, and Japan over the past 2 years may open up new opportunities to enhance trilateral cooperation. In the case of the United States, the second Trump administration has pursued disruptive trade policies and shown skepticism towards traditional alliances, generating greater uncertainty in East Asia. In the case of South Korea, due to substantial domestic political turmoil, there was a change in both political leadership and the ruling party. In Japan, the election of Shigeru Ishiba moderate conservative as prime minister in 2024 signals likely shifting in Japan's foreign policy with an emphasis on dialogue and pragmatic diplomacy in relations with China and South Korea. From Beijing's perspective, these developments make trilateral cooperation more important than ever. Given my academic interest in China-South Korea relations, my presentation will be structured as follows. First, I will introduce how Chinese scholars have assessed the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's foreign policy. Second, I will share my recent research findings on the Yoon administration's diplomatic and security discourse based on an structural topic modeling analysis of the transcripts from the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee. Third, I will briefly discuss the current status of trilateral cooperation among China, South Korea, and Japan. Finally, I will propose several policy recommendations to strengthen future trilateral cooperation. Chinese scholars have critically assessed the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's foreign policy. Wang Sheng and Yang Sen described the administration's global pivotal state strategy as comprising two main components: value-based diplomacy and economic diplomacy. And they argued that this strategy has deepened regional tensions by reviving Cold War-era ideological divisions. Similarly, Sun Chenghao and Ye Rujing criticized the administration's pro-US posture, contending that its value-oriented diplomacy distanced South Korea from China and weakened bilateral cooperation. Zhang Kaini and Wang Ping observed that Yoon administration's alignment with the US and Japan contributed to a new regional order, driving North Korea closer to Russia. Li Dunqiu accused the administration of compromising national interests to facilitate the US, South Korea, Japan trilateral alliance. Li Nan predicted that South Korea would soon return to balance the diplomatic approach between the US and China, distancing itself from Washington's hardline China policy. Zhang Shen and Bao Zhaolin emphasized that the Yoon administration's transition from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity rendered South Korea more vulnerable to China-US tensions. Finally, Zhang Debin highlighted how shared external pressures, such as US tariffs, could facilitate closer trilateral cooperation. He advocated for reviving multilateralism and resuming stalled FTA talks. According to him, China, South Korea, and Japan, with a combined GDP comparable to that of the US, can effectively counter external pressures through deeper regional integration under RCEP and similar frameworks. Then I also examined how South Korea's diplomatic and security discourses have been shaped and evolved over the past 3 years under the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Using structural topic modeling analysis on total of 52 transcripts from the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee during the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, I identified key themes. First, there is a strong focus on traditional security issues, including the Russia-Ukraine war, trilateral defense cooperation with the US and Japan, and North Korea's denuclearization. These topics reflect a realist orientation in the Yoon administration's foreign policy. Second, economic security and industrial strategy have emerged as prominent concerns. Topics including FTAs, semiconductors, and supply chain demonstrate the administration's prioritization of economic diplomacy. Third, historical and environmental disputes with Japan, such as the Fukushima wastewater discharge and the first level issue, have remained significant, suggesting persistent tension in Seoul-Tokyo relations. In addition, I also conducted domestic party-level analysis, which revealed notable partisan differences. It revealed that the People Power Party, 국민의힘, emphasized military cooperation with the US and Japan and focused on North Korea's threats and border security. In contrast, the Korean Democratic Party, 더불어민주당, criticized the government's soft response to Japan's historical and environmental issues. The Yoon administration's short tenure and the shifting ruling party are likely to usher in substantial foreign policy changes. As an opposition party in Yoon's government, the Democratic Party maintained a critical stance. Now in power, it is expected to adopt a tougher position toward Japan. During the presidential campaign, Democrat candidate Lee Jae-myung stated his goals as building a future-oriented comprehensive strategic alliance with the U.S., maintaining stable relations with China, and prioritizing national interest in relations with Russia. Regarding Japan, he emphasized confronting historical and territorial issues. In November 2023, Lee called for a swift revision of South Korea's bloc-centered diplomacy and pivot toward pragmatic, interest-based diplomacy to restore relations with China. Therefore, by analyzing the parliamentary discourse during the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, we can partially predict how the Lee Jae-myung government and the ruling Democratic Party may shape their foreign policy toward neighboring countries. Due to time constraint, let me skip the current status of trilateral cooperation part. Based on the preceding discussion, I would like to propose the following 7 policy recommendations. First, resume trilateral FTA negotiations and integrate them with the existing RCEP framework. Establish institutionalized dialogues on trade and export controls to enhance supply chain resilience and strengthen industrial linkages. Second, promote joint research and development and deepen cooperation in cutting-edge technologies such as AI, 5G, and semiconductors. A trilateral digital economy platform should be established, encouraging South Korea and Japan to actively engage with China's innovation hubs. Third, enhance cultural and academic exchanges by leveraging the South Korea-China-Japan Cultural Exchange Year and revitalizing programs such as East Asian Cultural Cities Initiative and student exchange schemes. Fourth, strengthen regional multilateralism through mechanisms such as ASEAN Plus 3, uphold WTO norms, and jointly combat protectionism in support of open and inclusive regional order. Fifth, manage historical disputes through diplomatic channels by entrusting negotiations to professional diplomats while placing greater emphasis on shared long-term interests of Northeast Asia. Sixth, prevent eastward expansion of NATO into Asia. Instead, efforts should focus on institutionalizing regional governance mechanisms such as RCEP and ASEAN Plus 3 to maintain peace and autonomy in East Asia. Last but not least, fulfill the One China policy, which constitutes the diplomatic foundation of China's relations with both South Korea and Japan, and is essential for ensuring long-term regional stability. That's all from me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bin. So Bin covered some everything from the institutional measurement and the security issue, also some maybe some the emotional dimension. So right, the maybe some the there's some the presenter cover up some the trilateral cooperation. So next presenter is the Ayaka. Ayaka cover both issues, some the trilateral cooperation and then Korea's participation on G7 platform. Right, please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate Professor Chong-Hwan Lee and 5 other discussion scholars. Once again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present today. My name is Ayaka Ohara. I'm from Seoul National University Graduate School of International Studies. Today, I'll be talking about the Korea's emerging the role beyond the G7, focusing on new opportunities for multilateral cooperation in East Asia. In this presentation, I will cover 4 main areas. First is Korea's global role, and the second is Korea, Japan, China trilateral cooperation, and the third is youth and people-to-people exchanges, and finally, policy recommendations. So, in recently, In recent years, South Korea gained growing visibility in global diplomacy, especially through its spread invitations to the G7 summits. As the Indo-Pacific region undergoes major geopolitical shift, Korea's role as a middle power is becoming increasingly significant, not only globally, but also in shaping regional cooperation within East Asia. This year, Korea and Japan are celebrating the 60th anniversary for the normalization of their diplomatic relations. As part of this milestone, new measures such as special immigration lanes have been introduced to facilitate people-to-people exchanges. And from my personal experience as a Japanese student studying in Korea, I have observed a growing number of Japanese students studying in Korea. And for example, the Global Korea Scholarship have expanded its Japan-Korea special program to encourage more Japanese students to study in Korea. In addition, I have created a Japanese Student Association at Seoul National University to support culture and educational exchanges on campus. So next, talking about the G7 and Korea's emerging global role, the repeated invitation to the G7 reflects its increasing importance in global governance. Under President Yoon Suk-yeol, former President Yoon Suk-yeol, Korea has aligned closely with major Western powers on economic security and Indo-Pacific stability. However, expanding G7 membership remains politically sensitive. Russia's exclusion from the G8 demonstrates for the fragility of consensus within the group. Adding new members such as South Korea and Australia may also trigger demands from BRICS countries such as India or China. As Kasfo Mavadani has argued, more flexible and regional forms of multilateralism may be better reflect today's shifting global power structure. In this sense, Korea can play a bridging role between global institutions like the G7 and emerging regional frameworks in East Asia. And next, I'm going to talk about the third point, Korea, Japan, China trilateral cooperation, opportunities amidst geopolitical shift. So despite historical tensions, trilateral cooperation among China, Japan, and Korea remains critical for regional stability. These three countries shape deep economic interdependence. Since 2012, they have been negotiating a trilateral free trade agreement that would cover around 20% of global GDP. Negotiations have faced challenges due to political sensitivities and overlap with existing agreements like RCEP. Still, concluding this agreement would help stabilize supply chains, promote trade liberalization, and deepen regional integration. At the 7th NIA KF Seoul process held this June, and Professor Toku Chung emphasized that U.S.-China competition cannot break Northeast Asian structural interdependence. Former Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs Hitoshi Tanaka added that even with the potential return of Trump administration 2.0, there may be renewed man-to-man for the regional coordination. At the same time, Northeast Asia faces shared vulnerabilities such as supply chain disruptions, climate change risks, and North Korean security threats. This highlights the need for stronger trilateral mechanisms to manage common challenges. And next part is the people-to-people and youth exchanges, the key role of Campus Asia. While the government-level diplomacy often faces obstacles, grassroots exchanges are critical for building trust. One successful example is the Campus Asia program, which supports joint degrees, student mobility, and long-term alumni networks between China, Japan, and Korea. In June 2025, the Campus Asia alumni workshop was held in Beijing, and participants proposed innovative ideas such as mentorship program and Metaverse Campus Asia platform to strengthen the alumni engagement. This program is also now developing into the East Asian version of Europe's Erasmus program. And through this, through my also own participation in TCS Day on May 30th and cross-cultural activities, I have personally experienced the value of youth-driven exchanges, especially in an era of rising nationalism, and these people-to-people connections are really essential for building mutual understandings. And the fifth is the Korea, Japan, and US trilateral partnership, sub-regional security architecture, and alongside East Asian trilateral cooperation, the US, the Republic of Korea, Japan alliance remains vital sub-regional security framework. The three countries share democratic values and work closely on issues related to the North Korea and broader Indo-Pacific security. However, the alliance also faces new challenges. For example, the United States visa restrictions during the Trump 2.0 administration negotiatably impacted international students' exchanges. This shows that security cooperation alone is not enough. Strong people-to-people ties are also essential to sustain long-term alliance cohesion. And this July, I will be participating in the Young Trilateral Leaders Summit in Osaka, which aims to foster dialogue and strengthen relationships among the younger generation. And at the end, I'm going to talk about the policy recommendations. So to ensure that Korea can contribute to constructively to the both global and regional governance, I would like to propose several policy recommendations. So first is institutionalize the regular trilateral summits, ministerial meetings, and working level cooperation among Korea, Japan, and China, and expand Campus Asia programs into the additional academic fields and digital platforms such as Metaverse Campus Asia. And the third is promote youth political participation through civic elections, education, and leadership development programs. And the fourth is balance Korea's G7 engagement with inclusive regional diplomacy in East Asia. And lastly, empower the civil society by supporting cross-border dialogue, joint research, and media collaborations. At the end, as a conclusion, I would say Korea's expanding role with the G7 reflects its increasing global influence. However, rather than narrowly pursuing G7 membership, Korea is uniquely positioned to take the lead in fostering regional multilateralism in East Asia. So by balancing global and regional and sub-regional cooperation, and by emphasizing people-to-people exchanges, we can work together to promote long-term peace and prosperity across Northeast Asia. So I just wrote like 3 discussion questions, I'm not sure whether we can use it or not, but just let me explain. How can Korea, Japan, and China institutionalize and deepen people-to-people exchanges beyond the existing Campus Asia framework? And second one is what opportunities exist to balance security-focused Korea, Japan, US trilateral cooperation with more inclusive East Asians regional diplomacy. And the third is how can civil society actors help mitigate historical tensions and build grassroots trust for long-term regional cooperation. And thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I have mentioned about the Year Foundation seminar, very interesting seminar, because recently there is the less voice about the trilateral cooperation, but maybe this year Year Foundation seminar, maybe some important some opinion leader start to mention about the more importance of the trilateral cooperation, the Trump era. So and then this point, maybe in this condition, maybe we will also discuss about the Korea's participation on G7, and then Kyoto상 the cover up some the G7 Korea's participation on G7 platform and then focusing on Korea-Japan relations. Okay, let's go ahead.
So hi everyone, my name is Kyoto Motor, a master student of the Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. First of all, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Korean Association of International Studies for inviting me today. It's my honor to be here. Today, I hope to share some ideas of trilateral cooperation from Japanese perspective regarding to Korea's G7 participation. So South Korea has long been recognized as the middle pole punching above its weight in international affairs, from mediating regional tension to contributing troops to UN peacekeeping. Korea's diplomacy has emphasized multilateral cooperation and the global Korea vision. Today, Korea aspires to move from being a rule follower to a rule setter in global governance by joining the world's top. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol has explicitly championed a global pivotal state strategy a bit for greater global influence, and under his leadership, Korea has signaled a clear interest in G7. In fact, Korean officials have quietly lobbied G7 nation for inclusion, aiming and to expand to G7 into G9 that could formally include South Korea and possibly another democracy like Australia. So this ambition comes at a time of shifting geopolitics as authoritarian coalition such as expanding BRICS grow in influence. Many argue that the leading democracy should likewise strengthen their ranks. In this context, Korea's G9 aspiration represented both an evolution of its middle pole democracy and a response to a changing world order. Japan, as an only East Asian member of the group of 7 G7, currently in a unique position linking Asia with the Western powers. For decades, Japan has shouldered the responsibility of representing Asian perspective in the club. The prospect of adding South Korea to create G9 could significantly alter regional dynamics and G7 internal balance, including Korea would double East Asia's voice in the forum, bolstering the G7's strategic launch in issues centered in Asia. It would diversify what would largely Euro-Atlantic club, injecting more Asian viewpoints on the global issue, ranging from supply chain to North Korea. Notably, experts highlight that Australia and South Korea should be at the front of the line for G7 expansion, both in an advanced, trustworthy democracy whose inclusion would remedy G7 heavy Eurocentric theocracies. Japan itself has shown openness to Korea's greater engagement. Former Japanese Prime Minister Kishida invited President Yoon to attend the 2027 Hiroshima G7 summit, an unprecedented gesture that acknowledges South Korea's growing stature. As expands G7 with the Korean membership could enhance regional stability by formalizing Japan-Korea cooperation at highest level. With Korea at the table on equal footing, coordination between the two neighbors and the policy becomes more routine, reducing an historical mistrust that often plagued their bilateral ties. Indeed, some argue that giving South Korea a seat of the same term in Japan will help soften and domestic South Koreans' opposition to closer relation with Japan. In other words, sharing the prestige and responsibility of G7 membership could solidify a more equal partnership, turning the page on the past animosities. Of course, this development would reverberate beyond Northeast Asia. China may view G7 to G9 expansion that includes Korea as a hostile move and containment strategy by U.S. allies, and could respond with higher tension on economic retaliation. Nonetheless, the overall regional trend favor close aligned of the like-minded democracies. So Japan and Korea's joint presence in the G9 would signal more united East Asian front within the rebel order, strengthening the collective responses to regional challenges. A core area for the Japan and Korea collaboration is economic security, especially amid the U.S.-China strategic rivalry and the post-COVID supply chain reorganizations. Both nations have high-tech powerhouses. Japan lies in an advanced material and industrial mechanism, while South Korea is a top producer of semiconductor, batteries, and electricities. So this makes cooperation and a secure supply chain a national win-win. After COVID-19 exposed the risk of the over-reliance of the single suppliers, Korea and Japan has been working to build supply chain resilience together. The recent reapproachment in their relation opened the door for the coordinating critical supplies lines and annihilating disruptions. For example, in 2023, Japan lifted export control on semiconductor material, and Korea in turn withdrew its WTO compliant steps that create new opportunities to jointly fortify supply chain and guard. Rather than competing, Japanese and Korean firms now are exploring a way to complement each other in chip manufacturing and battery productions, ensuring that each country can count on the other for keeping key inputs in the time of crisis. Due to the time limitation, I would like to skip the intertrilateral economic consensus. So beyond economics, the expanded partnership between Korea and Japan is vital for regional security and stability. North Korea's escalating missile and nuclear threats have long necessitated a closer Japan-Korea coordination. Recent diplomatic breakthrough enabled exactly that. Under former President Yoon, South Korea normalized its military information sharing pact with Japan after it had nearby lapsed amid the past. Now with intelligent flowing between Korea and Japan, both countries are better equipped to track North Korean provocation and coordinate responses. They have resumed the high-level defense dialogue and even conducted a trial of ballistic missile defense drills with the United States, sending a clear message of unity. Analysis observed that these restored security ties strengthen the defense and deterrence on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. Influence of G9 net frameworks such as cooperation would be further institutionalized. Japan and Korea could jointly drive G9 discussion on North Korea's denuclearization or maritime security, ensuring their regional perspective shape global policy. In conclusion, South Korea's push for G9 membership reflects its coming of age of global actor. Japan's support will key in turning the aspiration into reality. What steps can be taken and institutionalize their cooperation going forward? First, G7 powers, including Japan, should seriously consider a formal expansion to include South Korea. As one former minister of Korea argued, Korea's membership would significantly expand the vision of philosophy of G7 by upholding democracy, free markets, rule. Japan, having benefited from being the sole Asian voice, can now magnanimously champion Korea's entry, a move entry that would enhance the G7 legitimacy and capabilities in Asia. Japan and Korea could jointly propose G7 plus consultation mechanism, laying the ground framework for expansion and addressing any concern from other members. Second, whether inside or outside of G7 structure, Japan and Korea should create enduring bilateral channels for economic security convention. A high-level Japan-Korea economic security dialogue focusing on supply chain resilience, technology sharing, and coordinated responses to economic coercion would formalize the progress made in recent summits. So this forum could be institutionalized with annual meeting and a working group, ensuring the collaboration on critical technologies and resourcing continues regardless of political cycles. It will also complement the broader multiracial efforts like US-led Indo-Pacific economic framework, with Korea, Japan acting the united bloc on key standards and trade rules. In navigating the geopolitical shift beyond East Asia, the robust Japan-Korea partnership anchored a G9 framework could become a linchpin of the rules-based order. So policymakers in Korea, both countries, should seize the moment of the reapproachment to lock the long-term cooperation. By doing so, through formal membership, dedicated dialogue, and joint action, they will not advance their national interests, but also contribute a more stable, prosperous, and free Indo-Pacific region. The next few years, starting with upcoming summits, will be crucial for the translating the vision of the Korea-Japan alliance into reality. With foresight and political will, today's middle pole collaboration can be elevated into tomorrow's cornerstone of global governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kyoto provided the several advantages of the Korea's participation on the G7 platform, but I think that it seems that the Korea's participation on G7 platform would be some disadvantage to trilateral cooperation. At this point, maybe Suyun will add more point about the relations. So go ahead, Suyun.
Okay. Good morning, and I'm glad to see you. And I appreciate to Kai's giving me an opportunity to participate present in this conference. Actually, I prepared 5 subjects in my papers, but I will focus on 3 subjects now. Okay, first is background on the changes in Korea's G9 status. According to a report released in June 2024 by the US think tank CSIS, current global governance systems are failing to function effectively due to escalating geopolitical rivalries and ongoing conflicts. In this context, the report advocates for restructuring the G7 as a center actor for global governance, aimed at enhancing stability and predictability in the world order. While the G7 was originally established to respond to global economic crisis, its agenda has broadened to encompass a range of issues, including the Indo-Pacific, economic resilience and security, food security, digital competitiveness, climate, Ukraine, sustainable development, disarmament and non-proliferation, and labor. Nevertheless, the G7 currently faces critical challenges: a declining representativeness in terms of both the global economy and population, which undermines its capacity and legitimacy. The G7's share of global GDP peaked in 1992 at nearly 2/3, but has since fallen below 50%, currently standing at approximately 43%. In terms of population, the G7 now accounts for just under 10%, approximately 9.8%. So, CSIS proposes the inclusion of South Korea and Australia as new members. While neither country possesses a large population, they are the proper countries to address the problem of overrepresented Europe within the G7. And given that Japan solely represents the entire Asian region, the addition of South Korea and Australia can mitigate regional imbalances within the group. For this reason, CSIS described these 2 states as sweet spots. There is a growing consensus that expanding the membership is necessary for the G7 to fulfill its intended role in global governance. For South Korea, which has participated multiple times as a guest at the G7 summits, the prospect of acquiring full membership status carries significant diplomatic implications. It signals an elevation of reputation, in capacity, and reliability as a global actor. Will the second Trump administration in 2025 be a new variable? In 2020, Trump criticized the G7 as an outdated group and advocated for its expansion. He proposed the formation of a D10, which would include South Korea, Australia, and India, although this initiative failed to be realized due to opposition from several members. Under the renewed Trump administration, it remains to be seen whether discussions on G7 expansion will be reinitiated in earnest. Now, the second subject, the implications, advantages, and challenges of South Korea's potential participation in the G9. The proposal to expand the G7 into a G9 can be understood as part of a broader US strategic effort to reshape the global order by reclaiming influence over global governance. In a world increasingly defined by the confrontation between democracy and authoritarianism, the reconfiguration of cooperative networks to include countries such as South Korea and Australia, both capable of playing vital roles in technology, supply chains, and security, signals an attempt to expand alliances based on shared values. The fact that South Korea is being mentioned in this context and granted the opportunity to participate holds considerable significance. It presents an opportunity for the international community to formally acknowledge South Korea's elevated status in the global economy and diplomacy. In particular, South Korea's role in strategic high-tech sectors such as semiconductor, 5G, 6G, and artificial intelligence positions it to contribute at a similar level to or even exceeding that of existing G7 members. This may foster a virtuous cycle, enhancing Korea's influence in both the global markets and the diplomatic arena. Until now, Japan has been the sole Asian member of the G7 and has thus served as the primary representative of Asian and Indo-Pacific interests within the group. However, the participation of South Korea and Australia would enhance regional representativeness and allow for more balanced interests. It is important to note that the extent to which regional interests are advanced will likely depend on the quality of cooperation between South Korea and Japan. If their cooperation proceeds effectively, it could serve as a critical turning point in improving the quality of regional collaboration. However, if bilateral coordination proves difficult, it could hinder the G9's operational effectiveness and exacerbate existing fractures within Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Given these circumstances, South Korea's potential accession to the G9 could provide an opportunity to pursue a more mature and constructive bilateral relationship with Japan. One of the primary advantages South Korea could take from joining the G9 lies in its potential to participate not as a passive rule taker, but as an active rule maker in restructuring global order. Such participation would offer an important opportunity for South Korea to experience and learn a larger diplomatic stage. Given that the rationale behind the expansion of the G7 is rooted in a global orientation, the inclusion of voices from the global south becomes increasingly important. If South Korea can identify and occupy an appropriate niche, it may secure a meaningful position of structural power. As a practical partner, South Korea's technological capabilities lay the foundation for serving as a bridge between the global north and the global south. However, there are also clear risks. China may interpret such participation as a sign of strengthened strategic alignment among South Korea, the United States, and Japan. It can be a factor in potentially intensifying structural tensions in Korea-China relations. Given the increasing prominence of the Indo-Pacific on the G7 agenda, the transformation into a G9 through joining South Korea and Australia could be perceived as an attempt to reinforce US influence in the region and as a containment strategy against China. This perception may prompt China to undertake economic or diplomatic retaliation. It may be similar to Russia's response to NATO expansion. While the existing G7 is strongly linked as a transatlantic alliance between North America and Europe, the envisioned G9, if realized with the participation of South Korea and Australia, would extend this access through a new strategic bridge comprising Japan, South Korea, and Australia. The emergence of such a horizontally expanded alignment with global reach may heighten Beijing's sense of encirclement, and South Korea may consequently find itself facing retaliatory measures from China. And the last is my opinion on South Korea's potential participation in the G9. South Korea's participation in the G9 is not a temporary diplomatic event, but rather a structural shift in the country's status within the world order. If South Korea officially joins the Western-centric group, it would mark a transition from a peripheral actor to a core player. As much as the symbolic significance of G9 membership, it is essential to recognize that participation would entail increased responsibilities and obligations. South Korea may encounter difficulties maintaining strategic ambiguity, as its participation in the G9 could be regarded as a choice tilting toward the United States. Therefore, the joining process of the G9 should be gradual and carefully managed, particularly due to the necessity for diplomatic collaboration involving both external stakeholders such as China and internal stakeholders such as Japan. Recently, South Korea has participated in G7 summits mainly as an invited observer. Considering this, a phased and flexible transitional strategy, such as the G7+2 model, could prove effective. This model would treat South Korea and Australia as semi-permanent partners functioning as a transitional stage before full G9 integration. For instance, South Korea could engage as a member state in G7+2 meetings on issues holding comparative advantages. If so, it can generate a strategic synergy while adopting a more reserved posture on diplomatically sensitive matters. Such an approach would allow time for adaptation, reduce the likelihood of resistance from Japan, and mitigate potential backlash from China. It would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate South Korea's capabilities to the broader international community. Should South Korea be formally recognized as a G9 member following this buffer period, it would take a better position within the G9 and the global arena. In sum, G9 participation represents both an opportunity and a challenge for South Korea. In the long term, accession to the G9 would be conducive to South Korea's strategic interests. However, South Korea must consider how it can achieve a soft landing, taking into account key stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Suyeon. Suyeon gave us some comprehensive view about Korea's participation on G7 platform, and then also maybe it's the disadvantage to trilateral cooperation a little bit. So, yeah, we done nicely the first round. We have the 30 minute. Maybe I think it's enough time for second round and possibly third round. So, in the second round, all of the participants became the discussant now. Okay, so maybe let's keep the presentation order from the Haemin to Suyeon, right? So the second round is the commenter and then also question to other participants, right? So start from the Haemin. Yeah.
Yes, I think my opinion shared the same idea with Truthling and Kyota. Ayaka Ohara-san. And I'll read the Truthling, the discussion paper carefully, and I was able to think and learn a lot from her opinion. She analyzed the three major factors that have impeded progress in trilateral cooperation. among the three factors that she raised, the US-led regional order was particularly emphasized as the most important factor. I agree with her opinions, and I think the ideological polarization that has continued since the Cold War has solidified the US-led regional order based on path dependence. However, the changes in the regional order and the US-China competition circumstance since the Trump administration seem to be a medium for creating cooperation between the three countries in economic areas for diversifying supply chains and resilience. And it is helpful to think about the Imada Kota's ideas. Grassroots exchanges and people-to-people exchange is the shared with my idea. And my second option, bottom-up strategy, is shared with this idea. Cooperation can occur not only the high level, such as the political and economic parts, but also the low level with the working level and people-to-people level. So I would like to introduce the recent meetings that I skipped due to time limitation. It is interesting for me. There was a recent meeting between the three countries in March 2025. The foreign ministers of the three countries met in Tokyo, seeking to strengthen ties as a turning point in history. They discussed the need for cooperation on issues such as aging populations, declining birth rates, and the green economy. Moreover, the countries' trade ministers agreed to speed up talks on the South Korea, Japan, and China free trade agreement to promote regional and global trade. It shows the cooperation between three countries can occur not only high level, such as political and economy, but also the low level is bottom-up strategy share the same idea.
Okay, thank you. Maybe some people mention about the society level cooperation, so we'll answer this question. And so next is Sulin.
Thank you for Hemin's valuable comments. I have two questions for Hemin and Suyan. Hemin raised an important issue regarding the balance between economic security and economic cooperation. I found the topic very interesting. But if the two goals come into conflict, which one do you think should take precedence from a policy perspective? And for Suyan, Suyan provided a clear and insightful analysis for Japan and China might respond to Korea's accession to G9. I also agree that this would mark a significant shift for Korea from being a rule taker to rule maker. However, since the Trump era, confidence in multilateral institutions has been eroded, whether in relation to the war in Ukraine, the Israel-Palestine conflict, or other major crises. In this context, do you believe that institutions like the G9 can still function effectively in today's world? Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe Hemin and then Suyan will think about some of the answers. Who is the next one? Bin. Yeah.
My question is about Ri Hae-min's presentation. She provided a very structured overview of the history of trilateral cooperation and emphasized the importance of economic security as well as economic cooperation among our three countries. As noted in her presentation, the three countries must pursue cooperation in fields of economy and trade, including through the establishment of FTA and address issues that can substantively improve their economies and daily lives of their citizens. However, the explanation of the bottom-up strategy proposed by Ri lacks concreteness. It remains unclear which domains of cooperation at the grassroots level are expected to lead to broader collaboration, and how exactly such linkages are logically constructed and operationalized. It is important to explain more clearly how local or bottom-up cooperation can lead to broader policy changes or official collaboration between governments. In this context, she also mentioned the role of the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat in facilitating bottom-up collaboration. The TCS has indeed helped to lay an institutional foundation for trilateral cooperation, functioning as a stable platform for communication even during periods of political tension. It has played a constructive role in promoting decentralized cooperation, especially at the levels of civil society, youth exchanges, and the local governments. At the same time, the TSC faces clear limitations. It lacks decision-making authority and legal enforcement power, and its effectiveness depends heavily on the political will of the three governments. Furthermore, the TCS operates with limited financial and human resources, with a staff of approximately 30 members, which significantly constrains its capacity. Therefore, it would be helpful if Ri could elaborate on how grassroots level cooperation can effectively scale up to influence higher level intergovernmental cooperation, particularly in light of the structural limitations of the TCS. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting questions. So, and next one is the Wara-san.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask questions, like especially to Korean presenters, because since the election finished and the new administration going on, and then in the light of frequent like political transitions in South Korea, and also right now, Japan is also going to have the election for the upper house, and then how do you think these like bottom up like initiatives like grassroots cooperation can be better institutionalized, or like how it is be influenced by the new governance, or so that like they can not just temporary or like symbolic. So like my question is more like how we can continue those like grassroots trilateral relationship between like besides the new administration coming on. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is the Imada-san.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for the 5 scholars of the great presentation, and you guys are like a multifaceted analysis of South Korea's potential G9 participation in a trilateral cooperation, but it's very immersive, especially your emphasis on really defining Korea-Japan cooperation through strategic role division, acknowledging area for pragmatic cooperation with China, including possibilities to global south. And I also appreciated all the presenters' recognition that the trilateral cooperation will not only affect inter-three countries, but could face a regional order in East Asia, promoting reevaluation of trade relation between Korea, Japan, and China. So the discussion point I want to make is that given the constant both Japan and China and Korea potential strategic marginalization, so what do you guys think is the realistic potential for the 3 countries, Korea, China, Japan, to cooperatively contribute to shaping a new inclusive global order? So once again, thank you for the great presentations.
Okay, so finally is the Suyan.
Okay, I think other 5 presenters gave us a very good, insightful presentation, and I was very impressed to Ohara, Ms. Ohara's presentation, because she is mentioned about civil levels, some plans or initiatives. So it was very impressive to me, and I have a question to Japanese and Chinese presenter. Actually, I wrote about the Japan's expected response and also the China's expected response for about Korea's G9 participation. So, and I mentioned that maybe Japan will respond like this. Actually, if South Korea's participation in the G9 be realized, then it would signify the implementation of U.S. strategic intent or will, strong will. So, as such, Japan will have no choice but to welcome. But however, underneath, it may have complaints, I think. Because the joining of South Korea could diminish Japan's influence within the G7 framework by undermining its symbolism as a sole Asian member, and moreover, overlapping roles between South Korea and Japan in setting agendas and leading discussions may dilute also Japan's previously uncontested position. So, as I remembered, foreign minister of Japan, Motegi, yeah, he mentioned that he emphasized that preserving the G7 framework itself is very important, and I think it signals Japan's reluctance toward expansion. So I just want to hear opinion of Japanese presenter, and also I mentioned that China will respond. Korea's participation is some kind of expanding the alignment with the United States. So I think it could be conflicts between Korea and China, and so I just want to hear also from Chinese presenters.
Okay, thank you. So everybody provide some the question and comment to the other guys. So maybe you will answer again, maybe third round. But the people going to third round, is there any questions or comment from the floor? No, nobody want to. So
I want to deliver my comment on Lee Soo-yeon's presentation. Yeah. Lee presented a highly insightful analysis of the implications of South Korea's potential inclusion in G9 framework, and I fully agree with her perspective as noted in presentation. South Korea's participation in the G9 should not be viewed as merely a temporary diplomatic event, but rather as a strategic shift that challenges the South Korea's strategic ambiguity policy and is closely tied to structural changes in the international order. Furthermore, I find Lee's proposed eclectic solution particularly noteworthy, namely that South Korea's continued participation in the current format as an invited observer to the G7 may better serve the national interest. I strongly support this view. Lee offered a highly appropriate and insightful observation that the expansion of the G7, an elite Western-centered group, could be perceived as a threat by China and Russia, thereby becoming a potential trigger for regional intentions. It is not an exaggeration to say that the root of many contemporary conflicts and regional security dilemmas lies in the underestimation of great powers' threat perceptions, or the mistaken belief that such great powers do not feel threatened. China, in particular, may very well interpret the eastward expansion of the G7 as an attempt to build an Asian NATO. Similarly, the G7, an elite group centered around the West, is fundamentally led by the United States, and any expansion of the G7 in East Asia effectively signifies an extension of U.S. influence in the region. If the West has no intention of deepening confrontation, it would be more appropriate focus on platforms such as the G20, which includes China and other large developing and populous countries. Moreover, if the G7's declining share of the global population and economic output is indeed undermining its legitimacy, and if the genuine purpose of expanding the G7 is to enhance representation from Asia and Global South, then the focus should not be on forming an oddly numbered G9. Instead, serious discussion should center on the possibility of G10, one that includes China, a major power both in terms of population and economic size.
Really? Good. Interesting comment. Okay, so actually it is the additional point in the second round, right? Okay. So is there any comment or question from floor? If not, so we'll go ahead to some final maybe round about the maybe answering the question or the people's questions. But yeah, what kind of order? Maybe same order? Okay, same order is good.
Yes, thank you for questioning from Truth Linked. I think the concept of economic security and economic cooperation seems quite contradictory. So which one has priority is not an easy question, but if I have to say, security has the priority due to protecting ourselves is most crucial for us. When I was first deciding on the title, my title is When You Meet a Head-to-Head Competition, Take a Detour. I was struggling between when you meet and when you witness. We can be either the subject or the object of competition. I think that cooperation among the three countries can be enhanced when all countries take the initiative. Taking the initiative doesn't necessarily mean being aggressive in competition. So I think concept of economic security and economic cooperation will going well together. Thank you.
And next is Sulin.
I'll respond to the O'Hara's question. You raised the question about how grassroots level cooperation can continue without being affected by political changes. In my view, building a shared East Asian identity is crucial. Currently, people in the region strongly identify as Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. This often leads to cultural origin disputes between China and South Korea, such as debates over kimchi and traditional customs. China and South Korea, such as the debates over these issues arise from the lack of a broader regional identity. If we could develop a sense of belonging as East Asians, many of these civil level conflicts might naturally diminish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bin, can you add some more point? Answer the question? Nothing? Okay, go ahead to Wara-san. Yeah. Wara-san?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chui, responding my question, and also, okay, so from the Ms. Lee Soo-young, I would like to answer from my perspective to Japanese stance. I personally think that many in Japan view Korea and Australia's potential participation in the G7 is positively, as it increased the representation from Asia and make the group more globally balanced. But however, there could be a dilemma from Japanese side if more Asian countries join the regional balance within the G7 may shift too heavily toward Asia. So this could raise concerns for countries like India, China, Russia, who might see it an exclusive or strategic alignment. So from the perspective, I wonder if the future lies not in expanding the G7, but rather than strengthening the platforms like the G20 or creating new inclusive forms that involve emerging economics as well. And the G7 expansion requires all agreements from each countries, and then I believe that Japanese government may be open to that idea in principle, but at the same time carefully observing the positions of other members and overall geopolitical climate. So in my personal opinion, while Japan may not oppose Korea's entry, the decision will depend more on international consensus than Japan's stance alone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And I also answer to the Ms. Isuhun's question and the Japanese perspective. And Japan is likely to respond to South Korea's potential participation in the G7 with caution and pragmatism, I guess. So while officially acknowledging South Korea's democratic value and economic strengths, Japan may be reluctant to support G7 expansion due to concerns over prevailing group traditional framework and traditional framework. So Japan will likely emphasize the need of the consensus among the current G7 members while remaining open to practical conversion and South Korea's involvement through the outreach session or I guess special invitation. So yeah, that is my answer.
Okay, and finally, Suyang.
Okay, first of all, I thank you for kind comments from Japanese presenter and also Lee. And I think I gave a question from Kui, right? And she asked me, will G9 operate effectively in under some kind of geopolitical tensions, right? Actually, to be honest, if South Korea and Australia participated in G7, so it changes into G9, then I think it is very it reflects the United States' strong will. So it could be the G9 could be dominated by the United States. So then I think this group will not work effectively because of the opposition from China or Russia. But if Korea and Japan cooperate very effectively in the G9 framework, and Korea could be a bridge between China and G9, and we just discussed about like G7's broadening agendas. Among the broadening agendas, there is a climate. So the kind of humanity things, then we can cooperate, and this G9 will operate effectively. But if the United States dominated this group, then I think it's skeptical.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we finished all the presentation and then discussions and also answering the questions. Yeah. So regardless of the topic we discussed, this session's most important goal is the sharing the idea among young generation. So that is the more important point. So I appreciate every guys the sincere consideration and then participation. And then let's summarize and then make a comment on this issue. Maybe in this session I gave the discussion point. My guideline is how to improve the trilateral cooperation among the three countries in the era of the Trump the new administration. But the KAI's leadership wanted to add one more point: the Korea's participation on G7 platform, and maybe these two, maybe these 2 points could be some the conflictual, the competing or conflictual some relations. But I think the trilateral cooperation can deepen without regardless of this the Korea's G7 participation or not. So I think that anyway these two issues separated the issues. Maybe about the trilateral cooperation, I think recently with after the Trump administration's second the administration. So there is more the increasing attention on trilateral cooperation, even in the Japan and then South Korea. So maybe we can see how much the political leader of the three countries the develop this trilateral cooperation. I'm not sure about their real intention in this they're emphasizing the trilateral cooperation. Sometimes it can be just the only hedging strategy, not a sincere attitude to this the cooperation. But anyway, the trilateral cooperation became much more important to issue in the three countries, the three governments, the diplomatic goal. So let's see. And then many guys mention about the institutional measurement, focusing on the economic dimension, mainly trilateral FTA, right? Free trade agreement. But think about the FTA. The way we have also the other institutional measurement like the CCTPP, and then also RCEP, and then Korea and China made us the FTA. No FTA between the Korea and Japan until now. I'm not sure about the FTA between China and Japan. Not yet, right? Not yet. Yeah. So maybe I think it depends on the maybe Japan. Maybe Japan and then other countries never accepted the China as a member of the CCTPP. I can fully understand that maybe Korea never applied the membership to CCTPP. But anyway, the FTA is the good tool for increasing the cooperation. But maybe in this the FTA's the meaning is the very important at that time of the era of the separation of the economy and then politics. Maybe 정경분리, right? No, everybody knows that. So regardless of the political and then or nationalistic conflict, that we can maybe develop the economic cooperation. This is the maybe idea of the separation of the politics and then economy. At that time, the institutional measurement focusing on economic dimension can be a tool of the increasing cooperation. But now we are living in the era of the economic security. Every economic dimension issue became the securitized. So if we maybe three countries meet for the trilateral FTA, we should discuss about the supply chain or some maybe restriction on the technologies, some movement, and then other security concern in economic dimension. It's very difficult the time for increasing cooperation in economic dimension. So let's maybe Hamin mentioned about this point, economic security, and then the economic cooperation, the relation between the economic security and the economic cooperation. That will be the key concern to us. And let's move to the G7 issue. So I'm not a fan of the Korea's participation on G7. Maybe G7 sometimes considered as some credit to the advanced country, but the G7 membership means kind of the golden straight jacket. Maybe golden straight jacket means this member country will get us some restriction on the several maybe norm dimension and also value dimension. So G7 countries share the core, not of the economic politics or security policies, about the value and then principle of some regime or some other things. And then so G7 membership means the obligation and the duty for the global governance means some many duty. So that means the Korea should understand the kind of the meaning, and then maybe being also mentioned about the G20, and then G10. I'm not sure about G10, but think about some the G8. Maybe the G7 country invited the Russia and then discussed about how to handle the global order. But now the China prefer G2, the bilateral relations, and then G7 is not the same thing with their opinion with the United States. The G7 has its own the mechanism, but maybe G7 expanded to G8 or G9. What's the role of the G8? Maybe, and then what's the role of the G20? Maybe you are familiar with the Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The Gordon Brown always mention about we should go to the G20, not G7. So there is also this kind of the idea. There is this kind of voices. Maybe so. There are several other pointed. Maybe G2 provide the G10 the architecture. Then the G2. Maybe it's not the Chinese the official view, right? Yeah. So maybe interesting point. So and finally, there's a trilateral cooperation. Trilateral cooperation is maybe about the trilateral cooperation. Trilateral summit is a symbol of the trilateral cooperation. This summit is the product of the ASEAN +3. So that means our trilateral cooperation, Northeast Asian countries' cooperation, should be mingled with the much more broader East Asian cooperation. That means the Southeast Asian country and then also East Asian country meet together and then discussed about the regional cooperation. It's maybe fundamental principle of when we talk about the regional cooperation. So then in the afternoon, the other guys mention about this regional cooperation. Okay, so maybe trilateral cooperation should link with this broader regional cooperation. Okay, time is already over. So thank you for everybody to participate, and then thank you for audience. Let's finish our session. Thank you.